Sociology kind of intrigues me. Actually, what most intrigues me is what is called social psychology. And that basically takes a look at why is it that we do the things we do in our cultures. Well, here's one of the things that sociologists and social psychologists are making lots of comments about for our culture. It has to do with how profoundly influenced our society, our culture, our world is by outside influences. And one of the primary outside influences, perhaps the primary outside influence in our world today, can you guess what it would be? Not politics, although that is a issue of discussion. The singular greatest outside influence in our culture, in our world today, is social media. There are some neat things about social media. After I had my heart attack and I was out of commission for 6 months. I really didn't have energy to go do anything but go to the doctor and I laid around like a slug, and that was a real discouraging time in my experience. But during that time, I did something that I had basically said I wouldn't do. I got on Facebook because it was, well, here was my justification for it. It was the best way for me to let people know how I was doing and how my recovery was going. And I reconnected with people I went to high school and college with, and folks that were many hundreds of miles, even thousands of miles away from me while I was in my recovery. And it was very helpful. And generally, it was an encouraging thing. Up to that point, I had always ridiculed Facebook people. And then I began to realize, well, there really is potentially some value in this thing. However, now 10 years later, wind it forward, boy, if I am not careful, Facebook and Twitter they're like a black hole for my time and my attention. I begin with a glance, and 40 minutes later, I look up and realize I've just been wasting my time. And here's another thing about it. At this point in time, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, all social media as a whole has become one of the more volatile points of input into our culture. I think the reason for that is because of the anonymity factor. There's a big difference between me sitting at my keyboard and pecking away some catty comment or harsh comment or threatening comment, and me looking at you eye to eye, face to face, and telling you the same thing. I'd never have nerve to do that, but most people don't find any problem in the pecking away part, right? It's just that's a fact. And now, one of the problems, a big problem with social media today is, how do you know what's true and what's not true? Because you can put anything up there. But we do have fact check. Really. And there's a continuing debate, and frankly, this debate's not going to go away. There's a continuing debate over how reliable the fact checkers are. And the truth is, you're never going to resolve that issue. I don't know. Honestly, how are you going to verify what is true and what is not true that gets spewed out into your social media feed? I don't know. What I do know is there's a whole lot that's out there that is true, and there's a whole lot that's out there that is not true. This is not a new issue. There have been these true things and false things floating around virtually all of human history. Ever since Adam and Eve and their family began growing on this side of the Garden of Eden, we've had a problem with the truth. It just is part of our brokenness, I suppose, and one of the things that needs to be redeemed by the grace of God. Peter writes about that. We looked at the beginning of 2 Peter chapter 2 last time, but there were also false prophets among the people. I mean, it's as though he's pointing back and saying, hey, this is nothing new. Just as there will be false teachers among you. It's nothing new, and it will continue. They will secretly introduce destructive heresies. See, most heresies, I don't know of any heresy that has been proposed in this way. Hey, by the way, I got this heresy I want to introduce you to. And this, it really isn't the truth. It's just a distortion of the truth. But I want you to know about it. That's not how it happens. It's secretly, it comes in the stealth mode. Even denying the sovereign Lord who bought them. That wording sounds like Peter is saying, and this is the ultimate heresy. What's the result? Well, he says, bringing swift destruction on themselves. So does he mean that the heresy has begun and boom, there's destruction? No. Because frankly, there are heresies that have been promoted a long, long time. But when the destruction happens, very rarely is it a gradual destruction. Much more often it is a boom, sudden destruction. Well, okay. And then in verse 2, many will follow their depraved conduct and will bring the way of truth into disrepute. Now, there are at least two things in that. One, the first thing is that people will follow the example of those who promote these heresies, these false teachers. People follow them. You know, there are people who they actually understand, and they can at least regurgitate these false teachings. They have the academic background to perceive, and all that. Okay, but that most of the people who follow these folks, it's really they're following the attractiveness of the personality. I mean, think about it. It's true in politics, it's true in religion, it's true in scholarship to a large degree. The person with the magnetic personality, that personality and the magnetism of their personality trumps the content of what they say. Well, Peter says it. Many will follow their depraved conduct. And that's what I'm saying. Their teaching is wrong. And if their teaching is wrong, what will their conduct be? The word depraved is not a conversational word for us. It basically is reserved for a Bible word. Depraved. Well, that means bad. This is bad behavior. This is broken behavior. Many will follow their depraved conduct and will bring the way of truth into disrepute. Now, here's the thing. The reputation for the way of truth is bound up in the conduct of the followers of the way of truth. We, as Christians, we make the claim that we're following the truth. And regardless of how well we can parse out the truth, regardless of how many scriptures we can quote, regardless of how many Sundays in a row we've been to church, it's our conduct that demonstrates our commitment to the truth. That's just the way it is. It will always be that way. My conduct will trump, my propositional postures, right? And I don't know if those words make any difference, but I do know, tell me all you want, but I'll probably decide on the basis of your behavior. Your words are important, but your behavior trumps your words, okay? One of the last things any Christian should want to do would be to bring the way of truth into disrepute. There are folks, religious folks, who do and say things that create all kinds of problems for the way of truth. I try hard to not be judgmental, but as I'm attempting to be observational, there are folks who are very high profile in the religious world whose lives and demeanor and behaviors really don't demonstrate the humility of Christ very well. Well, let's leave them where they are, and let's just take a real square look in the mirror. Because, whatever that guy that's flying around on a private jet and living in a 20,000 square foot mansion with 3 swimming pools, 2 tennis courts, and a putting green, I'm not responsible for that. They're responsible for that. Here's what I'm responsible for. Is my conduct. Do my behaviors, my words, and my actions, do they represent the truth? Or do they bring disrepute to the truth? It's a tough, tough question to answer. It's a worthy question to ask. How are you doing with that? Don't get so tied up in making judgments about everybody else that you forget to look in the mirror. He talks about now in verse 3 some of the root issue. In their greed, you know what greed is? Greed is this thing that says, I never have enough. That old thing about they asked the rich guy, how much is enough? And his response was, just a little bit more. That's not a joke. That characterizes most of the people in the world. And honestly, a desire to build a better, more sustainable life is not evil, but it can get in the way of a more important desire, and that is to build a life founded on the truth of God and built within His design that is sustainable, because that's the only kind of life that is sustainable. That's why people who are making $5 a week on the other side of the globe can have joy in their heart because of what Christ is doing in them. And people on this side of the globe who aren't making $100,000 a year feel like they're being mistreated and that the government's not taking care of them. And I understand there is real poverty. There really is such a thing as deprivation. And I'm not ridiculing them. I'm just looking at most of the people I deal with, and we're not victims. Yeah, well, greed. Pretty big subject. And it's a lot more fun to kind of throw that accusation out there than to see it bounce off the mirror back at me. Coming back to that next time. I'll see you then on So Care with Stevie Boy.